Thank you for joining us for this session of Connecting the Dots. Late onset hearing loss, Awareness Week is next week. Was it May? What's the official dates,
May
Valerie?
4 through 10.
Thank you. And Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Week is an annual awareness campaign that is aimed at promoting ongoing hearing health monitoring for all children and connecting families of children identified with hearing loss later in life with services, supports, and hope. About 15% of students ages 6 to 19 have hearing loss, and there are many common overlooked signs, which Valerie's going to talk about this evening. This is very near and dear to me, and I'm very excited to have you with us here tonight. Valerie James Abbott is going to connect the dots and bring awareness. Valerie is a early intervention, I'm going to read it, okay, case manager for the Infant Toddler Connection of Virginia, an award-winning author and the parent champion behind the Pediatric Late Onset Hearing Loss Awareness Campaign. Valerie's youngest child developed bilateral, help me,
Sensory neural.
sensory neural, thank you, hearing loss as a toddler, which led to her advocacy for improving community awareness about the importance of ongoing hearing health monitoring. She is an active member of the Virginia Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Advisory Committee, a past board member of Virginia Hands and Voices, and a member of the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia. If you have any questions during tonight's Connecting the Dots, please submit those questions to the chat box located in the controls near the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to answer those questions throughout the presentation. And Valerie is also going to share her contact information, so if you have any additional questions, she is more than happy to answer those. So let's go ahead and get started. Valerie,
That
welcome.
sounds great. Thank you, Kathleen, so much for this invitation. I'm so glad that our paths crossed a couple weeks ago in Roanoke.
Again, just
Again.
keep running into each other.
Yeah. So I'm thrilled to share this information, and I know that it's being recorded so that it will hit more people later on. But this is an important topic that doesn't get enough airtime. So I'd love to chat a little bit about our experience and the things that we've learned.
Absolutely. So let's get started.
Yes. So this is Bridie.
Cute little.
She was almost 9 pounds. I know, you just want to squeeze her, right? She was almost 9 pounds when she was born. Bridie is the Irish nickname for Bridget. That's where that comes from. So her actual birth name is Bridget Curry Abbott. And when she was born, very happy, very healthy baby. We were only in the hospital for about 4 or 5 days. She was born via C-section, and she did pass her newborn hearing screen. I don't remember that. It may have happened in the nursery. It may have happened in our room. But I do have the paper, the paper signed that says she passed her newborn hearing screen. And so when we brought her home, we never really thought about her hearing health after that. And I think that's a pretty common thing. So as she moved from infancy into toddlerhood, she was a very happy, healthy, thriving kiddo. In fact, she was so healthy that she rarely saw her pediatrician. We went for well baby checkups and vaccinations, but other than that, she was never sick. I mean, never. No fevers, no ear infections, no sniffles, nothing, no throwing up, nothing. Very, very healthy kid. So what we thought we had was a child who was developmentally meeting her milestones, and she was for a while. But what we know now is that it was somewhere during this time frame when her hearing status was changing. And exactly when that is, we're not still not exactly sure, but it was somewhere in this window.
I can relate to that. We don't know when it was.
Yeah. So when she was about 2.5, we enrolled her in preschool. It was a very large, well-known preschool here in Richmond. And it was the same place that her older sister had gone. And that picture of her with the backpack was taken the first day. You could tell she had no fear. In fact, she had the attitude of, I've waited my whole life for this moment. And so we sent my husband off to work, and we sent my oldest off to kindergarten. And I remember driving Bridie to preschool, and she hopped out of the car and ran in as fast as she could. Um, and it was right around February of that year, so about 4 months later, after the teachers had had some time to talk with us about what they were seeing, that they brought up some concerns. It was actually, I think, in February, and it was during the parent-teacher conference where they make families, sit in these teeny tiny little preschool chairs, and they still do that, from what I
They
understand.
do. They do.
And so I remember the preschool teacher getting right to the point, and she said, Mr. and Mrs. Abbott, do you have any concerns about your child's speech? And my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, no. And she was surprised. She said, really? Do you find her hard to understand? And we said, sure, sometimes. They also mentioned some other concerns that they had at preschool. She didn't know her colors or her numbers. She didn't like to sit during circle time. She wanted no part of group activities like that. And so they asked if we would consider calling early intervention for a speech evaluation. So we did that. And I remember that process where we made the phone call. It was about a week or two after the parent teacher conference. Early intervention made the intake appointment. They came to our home. My husband and I really weren't concerned. My husband went off to work. My oldest went off to school. I took the day off of work. I'm sure that Bridie looked something like this, with stickers all over her face and a mess and running amok around the house. And I remember they were watching a lot of our interactions and asking me so many questions. And one of the questions they asked me was if I could give Bridie some instructions, and they wanted to watch that. And they asked if Bridie could please go get um, two or three things safely out of her room and bring them to me. And so I thought about it and I said, yeah, sure. And I remember saying, okay, so Bridie, and I got really close to her and I said, Bridie, come close to mommy. That's right. Come close to mommy. Bridie, go to your room, go to your room and get your hat and your scarf. Get your hat and your scarf. We're going outside. Go, go. And Bridie ran to her room and got her things and brought them to me. And I thought I had this, incredible, smart child. And they said, thank you so much. And then at one point they put her in the corner, facing the corner in my living room, and they gave her some blocks or Legos to kind of play with in the corner. And while her back was to us, I was sitting on the sofa. One of them brought out a bell, one of the early intervention people that were there, and they started to ring it. And then they brought out another bell and started to ring that. And there was absolutely no response on her part. And it became abundantly clear that we were probably looking at a hearing issue. And so we took the next steps of getting her an evaluation with a pediatric audiologist, who confirmed, yes, bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, moderate sloping to severe. No one could tell us anything about how it happened, when it happened, why it happened, just that it happened, and she was developmentally delayed.
Did you have any hearing loss in your family? Was there any history of hearing loss?
Absolutely none. My husband and I can go back in our families pretty far, and absolutely no family history that we were aware of that could, make this a genetic consideration. That's what we believed at the time.
How were you feeling when this was all happening?
So the best way I know to describe our grieving process, which started within seconds of seeing what was now clearly obvious to us, was a backpack of panic and guilt. Panic in, oh my God, what has happened? How did this happen? Is it connected to some other health concern? And then guilt over, how did we not see this? And how could she be so developmentally delayed and us not see it? So it was a very dark and heavy time for quite a while.
So after and we are going to move on, but I do have just general questions.
Yeah.
So, after early intervention services, did she go on to receive early childhood special education services or special education related services in K through 12?
Yeah. So the goal they told us at that point was for her to become kindergarten ready. So she was not quite 3, and she was going to start kindergarten at 5. And so what we were told was whether or not she'll have an IEP, whether or not she'll have a 504 plan, all of that kind of will depend. But it did end up where when she turned 3, we applied for the child find, and she was found eligible, and she had an IEP, and she started kindergarten. So she received services at ages 3 and 4 through the local county school system. And then when she enrolled in kindergarten, she also had an IEP.
Interesting.
Yeah,
But thank you for sharing. I
you're
appreciate that.
welcome. Yeah.
All right. Well, I do want to continue, but I really appreciate your story because I think, you know, especially as you mentioned, you know, she was healthy. There was nothing that you noticed that was quote quote out of the ordinary. She didn't have any comorbidities. But you know, it kind of sets you on that trajectory to doing what you do now, right? And to bring
Yes.
awareness. And so I'm really happy that you were able to share your story, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
For personal reasons as well. So there's
Yes. So one of the things that looking back, right, we know now that her unidentified hearing loss had a significant impact on her language and literacy. And some of the examples are here, right? She fluently used and understood a completely distorted version of English. And we were accustomed to understanding that distorted version of English that she was giving to us. We thought it was developmentally normal, but it was not. She could not be understood by others, and she could not understand the speaker, including us, if she could not see that person's face or lips. And that was something, again, that we just didn't notice. She did not connect colors to their meaning or spatial concepts. She preferred facing people if we were doing story time or reading a book. She really struggled with early reading skills, and that is something that we don't think about children and their really early literacy. The idea that that pictures and words are connected and words describe the world around us and help us communicate. She was so far behind with that it was really hard to get that train back on the track. And she struggled with memorization. And that's a really important early developmental skill in terms of the auditory ability to retain information and use it. So there was a lot going on that we had to overcome before she was ready for kindergarten.
right. And you know, I feel like, and I know we have talked about this, is, you know, those first 5 years are so critical for our brain development, right? 90% of our brain is developed by the time many of us go to formal education, right? By the time we turn 5.
Yeah.
The other 10% take until our mid 20s, but you know, the first 90%, those first, which were many, not that many years ago. I'm just kidding. But you know, that was something that I remember hearing about, right, was related to those like the neurons, right, in that brain development. When you have, she learned how to adapt, and most children do. So do you want to speak to that piece too, talking about how our brain?
Yes. So there's lots of things that go on in very early childhood. The neural pathways that we learn and we acquire and we strengthen, especially with our senses, that's vision and hearing. Those are all things that are established very early, which is why it's so important for us to be talking and singing and humming and exposing children, very young children, to different sounds of the world and sounds of nature and sounds at home, because it's creating these pathways that will be the foundation for language acquisition, and for environmental understanding and all sorts of things. And so when that is not as as strong as it needs to be, um, it makes everything else harder.
Right.
Everything else harder. And then the other thing, I'll talk a little bit about cortical reorganization. So children who, and I get this from my lovely friends at the Virginia School for the Deaf and the Blind, who do such an
Absolutely.
outstanding job with their unilateral hearing
Thank
loss
you.
presentation, that you need to have them on next.
We are already planning that.
How are you? Oh, wonderful. So
Working on it.
children with unilateral hearing loss, where it is impacted on one side and not on the other, the brain will adjust. That cortical reorganization, thank you very much, Rob Oblivion, really does have a long-lasting impact if that child is not identified and their needs not addressed. So there's a lot going on in the brain in those first several years that is difficult to reverse, and in some cases not possible to reverse, which is why we need to find these kids early.
Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the facts,
Yes. So
the risk factors.
yes, so there are four main things that I think everyone in the world who's connected to young children in any way, whether that's a grandparent, a preschool teacher, a nurse, like anybody who's connected in any way to young children, they need to know four things: the basic prevalence, risk factors, common signs of late onset hearing loss, which goes by a lot of different names, and the consequences that it can cause when it goes too late that we find these kids. So we'll talk first about prevalence. So most of us know that we do find some children at birth through the newborn hearing screening program. And generally speaking, today we find about 3 in 1,000 newborns have a permanent hearing loss. And it is the most common birth defect of children born in the United States. What most people don't realize is that children who are in a NICU for greater than 5 days have an increased risk of hearing loss. And the Mississippi Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Program, on their website, they are stating that hearing loss affects 1 in every 100 infants who are treated in a NICU. That's a lot of kids, a lot of kids. The incidence of hearing loss doubles between birth and school age. So after that child passes their newborn hearing screen and they go home, between that moment and school enrollment, just as many children lose their hearing as the number that we find through the newborn hearing screening program.
And we're
But
not typically getting our hearing
we
screens
are
until
not.
we enter school.
That's right. So generally speaking, in Virginia and elsewhere, we do not have most children properly evaluated for hearing between birth and school age. Crazy, 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 but it's true. It's also true that the incidence of hearing loss is higher for children in Hispanic communities in the United States. And there are a couple different theories behind that, but the data is strong. And so what that tells us is that children of Hispanic descent, we need to be keeping our eyes on their language milestones a bit closer. And instead of, when we see a speech delay or a suspected speech delay, instead of saying, well, that's because they're learning two languages, or that's because of, we need to recognize that under normal circumstances, that would be a reason to recommend a hearing evaluation. And then lastly, like you were mentioning earlier, almost 15% of students in the United States at ages 6 through 19 have enough hearing loss to impact them academically. We only know about this many.
Right. Right. And, I mentioned earlier, this is personal for me, because my son is in the second grade and he just got diagnosed with bilateral hearing loss, right? And so, and when I say just, like within the last, 6 months,
Right?
roughly.
I
And
know.
so, it's one of those things, and it was continually explained away for us. And he did fail one of his ears in at newborn hearing screen, and it was just explained away as like, well, maybe the machine is broken or maybe this, and it wasn't taken seriously because of he was also born with a genetic disorder. And then, anyways, fast forward almost a decade, right? And here we are finding this. So, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, there you go. Right? We just explain things away.
I know.
And I do, speaking of genetics, right, and risk factors, there we go.
So here's the list of risk factors that the Joint Committee on Infant Hearing has published for a very, very long time. This is not all of them, but this is the top of the list. Number one, children who have been in a NICU for greater than 5 days are automatically at an increased risk for postnatal hearing loss. Lots of reasons for that, but in simple terms, if a child has been in a NICU for greater than 5 days, they fall under that category, and passing their newborn hearing screen is not enough. They need to be reevaluated at a later date as well, just to ensure that their hearing hasn't changed. And if it has, that we're able to address it. In utero infections like congenital cytomegalovirus, also known as CCMV, it's the #1 non-genetic cause of hearing loss in children in the United States. 1 in 200 newborns is infected and affected. And many of those children who are born with a CCMV infection are asymptomatic when they come out. And in Virginia, we do not do universal CCMV screening, we do targeted. So there's a lot of children born in Virginia with an active infection when they are born. We don't know it because they're asymptomatic and their hearing loss develops later. And when I say later, I mean it could be a month later, a year later, 5 years later, 8 years later. So it really can impact children later on. Genetics. So you asked earlier, did you have any family history of early childhood hearing loss? And the answer is no. So then how did Bridie come into the world with the number one genetic cause of hearing loss that's non-syndromic, connexin 26? How did that happen? I don't know how that happened. Most of us, right? Most of us who have children with connexin 26 who are affected by hearing loss, we don't know how that happened, but it is. There's a genetic factor within her, and she has it, connexin 26. And when we talk about risk factors, there's known and unknown risk factors. And that's where we really need to be promoting ongoing hearing health monitoring at every age and any stage, because babies are born every day, every moment of every day. And many of them have an unknown risk factor when they're born, whether that's CMV, whether that's connexin 26 or some other condition that goes under the radar. So these are all of the other risk factors that the JCIH recognizes that puts a baby at increased risk of postnatal hearing loss. And so I think it's just important for people in general to know that there's far more risk factors for this than most people realize.
Absolutely.
Common overlooked signs in infants and very young children.
Right. Pretty much all of these.
Right? Right. So Bryony had about half of these.
Right.
He's demonstrating half. We did not notice. We didn't put two and two together. When people are like, oh my gosh, she had 4 or 5 of these things and you didn't put it together. No, we did not put it together, but so do many other families, because you're busy and you think what you're seeing is developmentally normal and they're thriving in every other way, or maybe they're not thriving in any other way and you're distracted by some other condition, some other medical emergency or developmental concern. And so you're not noticing these things. So these are the common overlooked signs in infants and very young children.
The high volume on TV is a good one, or in the car.
Yep. Yeah. And then as children get older, these signs change. Some of them are kind of similar, right? But they're a little bit different. The great one is inappropriate responses to questions. And what that means is that you ask a question and the answer you get back has nothing to do with the question that you asked. And you're like, what? Are you not paying attention to me? Right? They will watch other pupils and imitate what they're doing. So the teacher will say, close your books, put them in your folder, and then everybody line up at the door. And so the student will not have heard all of those directions because they have hearing loss that's not been identified yet. And so they're looking around to see what the other students are doing, and they will do that. Lots of other things, but the longer a child's hearing loss goes undetected, the more extreme the impact.
Absolutely. And I know, we talk about late onset with children, I mean, adults as well, right?
Yeah.
So many of these
Yeah.
things. So, I think, my question for you, Valerie, and I know this is very personal to you and something that you are a leader and advocating for and parent advocate. What is the one message that you really want to share related to this topic?
This is it, right? That every child who's deaf and hard of hearing deserves the chance to thrive. But first, we have to find them. When it comes to children with congenital hearing loss that's present at birth, we generally speaking are doing a very good job of finding those kids very early in their lives, with exceptions. But for the most part, we're finding a lot of them. And so from the very beginning, the family is aware of this. They're making decisions around this. Many of them are deciding to amplify. Some of them are deciding to include American Sign Language or cued speech. And so these children from very early on are receiving supports and services to help them with early language and literacy skills. They're at an advantage because we're looking for them. We're looking for them as soon as they come out of the womb. Children with postnatal hearing loss, no one's looking for them, or not really. And so what we need to do is recognize that they're at a disadvantage, those children, And the longer they go undetected, under the radar, the bigger that gap of ability to thrive becomes. And I believe that all children who are deaf and hard of hearing are absolutely perfect exactly as they are. They don't need to be changed, they don't need to be fixed, but they do need to be found. And so that's what my personal mission is, that what the mission of the campaign is to find every last child who is deaf and hard of hearing as soon as possible so that we can minimize the consequences.
Absolutely. And what would you say to a parent who is navigating this, like where can they go, right? To, who should they speak with? How can they advocate to ensure that their child has a an audiological exam, right? We talked about educational audiology. You
Yeah.
know, what can parents do if they have concerns?
So when it comes to children in Virginia, 0 to 36 months, right, we have Part C, we have early intervention. And any child who suspects a developmental delay or disability or atypical behavior has the right in Virginia to go directly to early intervention, ITC Virginia, Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia. And we have 40 different offices across Virginia because we're a Commonwealth. And so parents can self-refer. And they should know that when it comes to the hearing part, that is frequently recommended whenever there's a speech issue or a language concern. So that's one way, is to go through early intervention, and they will either do a screening or they will put you on the fast track to a hearing evaluation by a pediatric audiologist, not grandma's audiologist necessarily, but a pediatric audiologist. And then when children get older, and that's from 2 to 5, let's say, we have child find. And again, if we see a child in our family that we're concerned about a developmental delay, disability, we can go to our local school system, our local public school system, and say, I'm concerned. And what is required of every child that is found eligible to go through the process is a full hearing evaluation by an educational audiologist in that school system. Wonderful. So, and they're great. Educational audiologists are wonderful because they're accustomed to working with young students. But then children who are older, right? So we're talking about kindergarten and up. It's important to remember that hearing loss can happen at any age and any stage. And it can start at age 5, it can start at age 15. It can start anywhere in between and beyond. And hearing screening in schools after kindergarten or school enrollment is only every couple of years. And it is just a screening. So if you suspect something, say something. Talk to your pediatrician. Say, I really think something's up. I think, can you get me a referral for an audiological evaluation? I need to rule this out, and be aggressive about it. And if you have any problems being aggressive about it, just reach out to me and I will help you.
Excellent.